So I have a bone to pick with the UFC right now, and it's not just some little bone. It's not just some normal size little chicken bone you find at your local Denny's or something like that. This is a complete Tyrannosaurus sized bone. This is unbelievable how big this bone is that I have a personal beef with the UFC for. They are completely ruining themselves by continuing to put on these less than stellar fight night cards in the Apex. And I really have to emphasize the word in the Apex because Apex cards specifically are ruining the UFC and they're making these fight nights hard to watch or hard to be excited for. And I really do have to say this about the UFC. When you really understack an Apex card and it turns out to be boring, that sucks. That really does suck. Not only did I sit there and I watch 6 to 7 hours of fights that I wasn't even hyped for in the first place, but then it turns out they're all boring fights. I feel like I just wasted 6 to 7 hours of my life doing nothing. And listen, I'm going to continue to watch these cards every single week and I'll be hyped about something. Maybe there's a new prospect on the card. Maybe it's a guy making their debut. Maybe there's some underrated fight happening on that card. There's something to be excited about in every single fight night card, but there's levels to this. There's levels to excitement, right? When we have a card like UFC 300, this is probably a bad comparison, but I'm doing it anyways. But when you see all those names on there and you see fight after fight, a big name or a hyped up matchup, it really makes you want to watch the card. It really makes you have something to look forward to. And when I'm looking at every single fight night card that's coming up in the Apex, there really isn't much to look forward to. And obviously, there are fights that I am looking forward to, but if I had to rank it 1 through 10, 10 being I can't wait to watch this matchup, this is going to be the best fight of all time, and then 1 being I don't give a shit about this. I'm seeing a bunch of like 3s, 4s, 5s, maybe even sometimes even 2s when I go through every single fight night main event. And the UFC right now, it seems like they're really content with just letting the UFC Apex be their bottom dollar, or like just be their just get a fight night going for this week. And I do understand, right? It's hard. The UFC right now is a year-round sport. It's not like the NFL or the NBA where they have 6-month seasons. No, the UFC is going the entirety of the year. And I really do respect that. It's a difficult thing to do. And I understand a bad fight night every now and then, it's not going to burst my bubble and make me explode in this heap of madness. I won't go full rage mode and go Super Saiyan if there's one bad fight night every, month or two or so. But it seems like the UFC just doesn't care enough to even stack these next like 5 or 6 fight night cards in the Apex. We just had the Lizzie versus Imavov. And if I'm being honest about this was not a fight night card that we should have in the UFC. There needs to be a better main event for this. This, to me, is unacceptable. Now, this week, we have Hermansson versus Pfeiffer. Like I mentioned before, I'm hyped to see Jack Hermansson and Joe Pfeiffer, but what happened to the old UFC? What happened to the old UFC fight nights where the main event and the co-main event, those were guys who were fighting for a title shot. Those were top 5 guys who were trying to earn their way to the belt. What happened to those fight nights? It seems like now we're having guys who are in the top 10, top 15, guys who are even unranked fighting in the UFC fight night main event, right? Joe Pfeiffer right now for this week is unranked in the UFC. Yeah. And you know what? That would be acceptable if he was fighting a top 5 guy. So is Joe Pfeiffer fighting a top 5 guy? Let me guess. No, he's not. He's fighting a top 10 guy. Jack Hermansson is ranked number 10 in the UFC right now. So yeah, it's a good fight and I can't wait to watch it. But should this be a fight night main event? Hell no. This should be a fight night co-main event. And that to me would be worthy of that honor to be on a fight night. I'm kind of being redundant here, but you know what I mean, right? If this was a co-main event, I would have no problems, no gripes, nothing whatsoever. So we're not getting that. This is now a main event on a fight night. And so what does the UFC give us for the co-main event? Maybe it's some super hyped up matchup again. Maybe it's 2 top 15 ranked guys. That would be acceptable in my opinion. It's 1 top 15 ranked guy. It's Dan Ige, who I believe is ranked 13th at featherweight, versus Andre Fili, who has been he's been really inconsistent throughout his UFC career. And guess what? he's unranked as well. And you know what? I can't be too angry about that because Andre Philly is coming in on short notice and he's replacing Lerone Murphy, who is unranked, but arguably Lerone Murphy earned his shot up the rankings. He deserves a ranked fight to get himself into the rankings. So I wouldn't mind that entirely. So I'm kind of pulling hairs here. And you know what? That's just one fight night. How about the next couple? How about the next few fight night cards? What's after this Piper versus Hermanson fight night? What can we look forward to? And after UFC 298, we have Brandon Moreno versus Brandon Royval 2. Now, this fight night is in Mexico. It's also crowded as well. Moreno Royval main event, Yair Rodriguez, Brian Ortega co-main event. Perfect. Perfect. That is what the UFC should do every single week. Every single weekend, the UFC should have this level of main event and co-main event. Now, the card does kind of drop off a little bit, but there's some prospects on there, so it's not the worst card of all time. It could be better, but it's mainly Mexican or Latino oriented, so we can't have, a bunch of high profile names on there. But still, after the main event and co-main event, there's kind of a little bit of a drop off. Now, I'm going off of Google. Google is not a reputable source right now, so I might have to go through Tapology. But in my opinion, this is an acceptable fight night card. Now, after this, right, after we have this crowded arena event, there's not even a main event scheduled right now for the next one following that. There's a card, a fight night card, a month away from now that doesn't even have a scheduled main event. I believe right now the top ranked fight on that card is Alex Perez versus Muhammad Mokaev, which is a great fight, but why don't we have a main event only a month away from the card itself? That means the UFC just doesn't care. They're struggling to find matchups, and they're just willing to throw any fight together and just slap it on a fight night card in the Apex and just say they're done with it and move on with the next one. And as a matter of fact, that's exactly what they do, because their next fight night card main event is Tai Tuivasa versus Marcin Tybura. Okay, it's acceptable, but the co-main event is Thiago Moises versus Brad Riddell. Again, I like these fights, but what the UFC needs to stop doing is they need to stop overstacking these pay-per-view cards and really skimping out on the fight night cards. And I know UFC 300 is pretty close. They're going to have to stack that with talent and overstack that card as much as possible. And maybe what that means is that we have to have very bad fight night cards because all those fights are being pushed towards UFC 300 and UFC 299. But Jesus Christ, you just can't spare a couple? You can't spare a few fights to put on these fight night cards? I mean, after this week, after the Tai Tuivasa Marcin Tybura fight, we have Amanda Ribas versus Rose Namajunas as a fight night main event in the Apex. And that to me is completely unacceptable. It's awful, and I just don't have much to look forward to, and it sucks. And I believe from now up until June 22nd, we only have 2 crowded arena fight night cards, and the rest are in the Apex, which is also unacceptable. I just really don't understand why the UFC is just so content to have these Apex cards and just thrown together out of nowhere, just thrown together with a few fights on there that have some level of excitement to them. They just don't really care that much about their quality of fight night cards, especially now. And I do understand they want to stack UFC 299, they want to stack UFC 300 because they need O'Malley to sell pay-per-views, and they need 300 to be the best card it's ever been. Still the main event for that one. Don't know what's going on. But maybe that means we're going to have a tough start to the year. And then as the year goes on, it might pick up a little bit. But still, I just don't like the Apex because it allows the UFC to have low quality fight night cards and get away with it because it's an Apex card. And the thing about the Apex right now is that we don't really need it anymore, right? Its purpose has been filled. It was a good placeholder while we had the whole sneezing event happen in the world. It was tailor-made for that, and I'm glad it got us through that terrible time in everybody's life, right? The Apex has been a godsend during those years of 2020 through 2021, 2022. It was perfect for that. But guess what? That time is pretty much past. We have moved on as a society, and I don't think the Apex has a role anymore. And I think the only role it does serve is just to save the UFC some money, right? If they don't have to go out and buy a huge arena or a huge venue and spend money doing that, they can just put it on their Apex, put it in their own hometown of Las Vegas, save some moolah, save some money, and then not even pay big name fighters some big money. So the UFC right now is saving a ton of money on these Apex cards. And I think it's apparent that this is what their purpose is now. Apex cards are a money saver for the UFC. They're not paying big names. They're paying fighters who are low ranked or just making their debut. So this is the minimum wage of the UFC. This is their bare minimum, and it's being pretty evident to us as fans because we have to endure this stuff. And again, these fight nights can be exciting. They can probably have some great bangers on there, and that's where the UFC really makes their money, because if they have a fight night card in the Apex with nobody on it, name value wise or money wise that they're spending, and then it ends up being a banger card, they get a ton of notoriety, they have new stars in the making, and it literally cost them a penny if we're talking about analogies here. Not a pretty penny, just a singular one uno penny. And so I'm pretty much done. I'm tired of the UFC trying to save money with these fight night cards, but it comes at our expense. And then you have some of these fans saying, you should be appreciative of all these fight night cards. I'm hyped for this card. I can't wait to watch Amanda Ribas versus Rose Namajunas. You're a casual if you're not excited for this fight. We have people like that in this MMA space who are going to call you a casual and call you out because you're not excited for Amanda Ribas versus Rose Namajunas for a fight night main event card. I'm out of breath. I don't know. As a guy who watches these fight night cards every single week and is a huge fan, I think we deserve more in quality for our fight nights. We deserve at least a top 5, top 10 matchup in every single fight night main event. And I understand the UFC can have some slack with me if every now and then they have a less than stellar fight night card, but it being an every single week thing or every other week thing and them purposely skimping out on the Apex ones to save some money, I think that is taking advantage of us as fans, and this shouldn't be acceptable. I don't know. Let me know your opinion down below in the comment section. I'm getting my ass out of here. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for notifications. I'll see y'all later. Peace.